No child has ever walked into my office and said, my parents listen too much. I mean, that just doesn't happen. My parents talk too much, you hear all the time. Hi, I'm Madeline Levine, and I'm the author of Ready or Not, Preparing Our Children to Thrive in an Uncertain and Rapidly Changing World. So I wrote Ready or Not because I had written two previous books, Price of Privilege and Teach Your Children Well. I've always been very interested in the mental health of children and teenagers. And back when I wrote The Price of Privilege, which is about 13 years ago, it was about 1 in 5 kids who suffered from an anxiety disorder. So fast forward over a decade, and we've had all these people talking about the issues, and yet the rates of anxiety disorders, of substance abuse, of self-harm, of depression, and of suicide all have increased. So I got incredibly curious about why things hadn't changed. We've had all these people talking about the issues, and yet the rates of anxiety disorders, of substance abuse, of self-harm, of depression, and of suicide all have increased. I think there's a particular thing that's happening with anxiety. I think our tolerance for anxiety, because we're so anxious, is low. And because we know our kids are pressured. You can be in any community and there's a kid who died by suicide. There's a kid who's in the hospital with a need. It's around. People know what the issues are. But they want to take pressure off their kids, and they're taking that pressure off their kids in all the wrong ways. And so I think what parents are doing is they're accommodating to normal developmental anxiety in ways that are not helpful. I had one kid, he was afraid to sleep in bed, not an unusual thing. Parents slept in bed with him. Fast forward a couple of years, he gets invited to his first sleepover party, which is an anxiety-provoking situation for most kids. It's supposed to be. It's a new situation. It's a challenge. But he said he didn't want to go because it was a strange bed. So his parents shifted the sleepover to his house, saying, basically, this is the only safe place in town. And then he goes to sleepaway camp after that, has a hard time with sleepaway camp. There are bugs. And again, his parents take him out of that situation. This is the kid I will see in college who comes back after 3 months of college saying, I can't sleep, I don't know my roommate, he's messy, and I don't want to sleep in a room with somebody else. I think that this is how kids are becoming less capable of meeting challenge at the exact point where they need to be more capable of meeting challenge. I had an interesting experience right before I came to New York. I was talking to 500 people in San Francisco. And for the heck of it, I just asked, how many of you have not had your heart broken? It was all parents. And out of 500 people, one person raised their hand and said they'd never had a broken heart. Maybe it's 2 people or 3 people, and they were shy. But the point was, that's life. And if you can't tolerate your child not being invited to the popular party because she's heartbroken about it, she's never going to be able to tolerate the really big heartbreaks that are waiting down the road for her. So, we build up tolerance by small incremental amounts of challenge. Parents need to have their kids become confident that they have value besides how they perform. One of the kids I treated for years would say all the time, I'm only as good as my last performance. And that's like a lousy way to feel if you're a child. So I think paying attention, listening. No child has ever walked into my office and said, my parents listen too much. I mean, that just doesn't happen. My parents talk too much, you hear all the time. So I think parents need to listen more. I think they need to be more curious. Psychologists, psychiatrists, we don't do anything profoundly different. Well, we do some things that are pretty different, but a lot of what we do is tell me more about that, or that's interesting, or even I think you can handle that whereas parents seem perpetually and compulsively worried about whether or not their child can handle writing around the block, or a difficult course, or not making the select team, or those kinds of things that I think are great opportunities for kids to learn resilience. I would probably say no, but I would also say every child's different, every family is different, and there is great variety in what different children need, and kids are incredibly forgiving. So I think in Ready or Not, I talk about sleep a lot because we have a lot of research on it, but my youngest son slept in my bedroom till he was probably 7 years old, off and on. And was that a terrible thing to do? I was exhausted. I had 3 kids and a career and a surgeon husband and a sick mother, and it was the best I could do. I think that if I allowed him to sleep in my room those years because I was anxious or he was anxious and it was a way of attenuating his anxiety, that probably would not have been such a good thing. But you have to think about parenting in its fullness. And so we make mistakes all the time. We don't do exactly what we're supposed to do all the time. But in general, if we can be loving and supportive and at the same time set limits and have demands, you know, the research is that's a pretty good formula for turning out a healthy kid. So I think there are a few things parents can do to foster resilience. The first one I said is to listen, and to, you know, the typical question of tell me more is what parents want to hear. They want, because what they're trying to do is not tell their kid what to do. They're trying to cultivate the child's ability to think through a problem. So you do that by tell me more. Or I recently had a young lady who was shoplifting, and she was about 14. And it was, and what happened next, right? Because those kinds of questions, as opposed to lecturing, draw a child, some of the time, into thinking about things. You stole those jeans, and she was kind of proud of it. Well, what happened next? So she has to think about what happens to the salesperson and whether they have to pay for it. And so you're encouraging a way of thinking with kids. So one thing is to listen more, to ask kind of open-ended questions, tell me more, what happens next, and having some sense of confidence that your child can manage, you can do it, you've got this, that kind of thing. I think the other thing that's really important is that parents have non-child-centric activities. I regret the fact that with 3 sons, I spent every weekend for years at the select soccer meet or at the lacrosse meet or whatever. That was my life. And I think that was an incredibly boring portrayal of adulthood for kids. And at one game, my youngest son, Jeremy, comes over and we're all sitting in the stands, like reading our phones or our books or our Kindles. And he said, "Hey, Ma, the field next to us is empty. Why don't you guys go play?" And that has really stayed with me, that for a child, seeing their parent do nothing but hunker down in the family and everything becomes critical, everything becomes sort of a litmus test. I think there's great advantage for the parent who is not giving themselves enough time to develop as well. You know, parents don't stop developing when their children are born. We have a trajectory. We have to grow as well with our children. So I like the idea of parents, and I generally see mothers, so it's more to moms, finding something in their life besides their kids and their family that will take them through, because their kids will grow up and leave. And I was just talking this morning actually to a woman who called me and said, "Don't feel bad, don't feel you didn't help people, you helped lots of people," because I've been talking about why I wrote this book. And she said, "When I heard you talk the first time, 8 of us went out and we formed a tennis team, and it's 12 years later and we still have that tennis team."